The light in the library always fell a little softer after 8 p.m., as if the world outside had finally exhaled. Lena lingered there longer than she should have, even after the clock had long forgotten her shift. But something about the hush between bookshelves, the glow of the old fireplace, and the scent of leather-bound pages let her heart settle for just a moment. It was one of the few places where she didn't have to pretend she was okay. She traced her fingers along the edge of the shelf like it was a memory she didn't want to lose, and when one book tilted slightly, she reached to fix it. And that's when she found the photo. It was tucked behind a row of outdated encyclopedias, curled at the corners from years of hiding. A young boy stared back at her, big eyes, slightly shy smile, no name written on the back. But those eyes felt like Sam's. Her breath caught, sharp and sudden. She pressed the photo to her chest, sat slowly onto the plush rug, and didn't even realize when the tears started. They weren't the loud kind. They were quiet, soft, the kind that made your body shake because they had waited so long to be let out. "You're not supposed to be here this late." The voice wasn't loud, but it broke through the silence like a stone through glass. She looked up, startled, and there he was, Damien. No phone in his hand, no jacket on his shoulders. Just him, standing in the doorway with that usual stillness, except there was something different in his eyes tonight. Something less guarded. I didn't mean, she began, scrambling to her feet, brushing her tears away with the back of her sleeve. He took a step closer. "You were crying." She didn't respond. Why? His voice wasn't cold now, just human. And it made her chest ache even more. "My brother," she whispered. "Sam. He's sick. He needs surgery. We can't afford it." He looked at her like he was trying to understand something that didn't fit into the neat boxes his life was made of. Then, softer than she expected, he asked, "What's his name?" "Sam." He nodded, like the name itself meant something. Then, after a long pause, he said, "You can finish this room tomorrow. Go home." That moment, simple as it was, shifted everything. The next morning, when she passed him in the hallway, he nodded. A few days later, he offered her a coffee. She thought it was a fluke. A week after that, he asked how Sam was doing. She blinked at him, unsure how to answer. No one ever asked, but Damien did, and he kept asking. Conversations grew, quietly. At first, they were about the library, then about books, then music, childhood memories. She told him about the stray cat she adopted when she was 12, who once brought her a dead sock instead of a mouse. Damien laughed. Not a polite chuckle. A real laugh, warm and unexpected. She realized then how lonely he must be, buried in his mansion full of antiques and silence. And he noticed how kind she was, how she always took a little longer with the library corners, how she rearranged the flower vases in the dining hall even when no one noticed, how she hummed to herself when no one was around. Except one evening, she was humming while cleaning the kitchen and didn't hear him walk in. She froze the second she saw him. "Don't stop," he said. "It's nice." From then on, he started working in the library during the hours she cleaned. She would hum under her breath, and he would type quietly on his laptop or scribble in an old leather journal. They didn't speak much during those evenings, but something about their silence felt full. One day, she admitted she used to sing. Before life got heavy, before hospitals and debt and keeping it all together. He listened carefully, then told her he used to play piano. She tilted her head and smiled. "Why did you stop?" His expression shifted. His eyes, usually so unreadable, darkened with memory. "Because she used to sing." He didn't say who, and she didn't ask, but something passed between them in that moment, a thread of grief that didn't need explaining. The weeks unfolded slowly, like the pages of a worn novel. Sometimes it felt like nothing had changed. Other times, everything had. Damien began leaving books out for her to discover. Lena left him handwritten notes tucked between pages with thoughts about the characters. Once he surprised her with a music box he found in the attic. It played a soft, haunting melody that made her think of rainy childhood mornings and warm blankets. She smiled when she heard it. He watched her quietly. But love, no matter how gently it begins, can still bleed when life cuts in. One morning, Lena didn't come to work. The staff whispered. Maybe she quit. Maybe she was fired. Damien didn't speculate. He waited a day, then two. On the third he made calls, traced her emergency contact listed on an old HR form, and found the hospital record. Sam had collapsed. Immediate surgery was required. They didn't have the money. She hadn't told anyone. That night, Damien didn't tell anyone either. He just paid, quietly, anonymously, every cent. 2 days later, Lena returned, not to clean, but to collect her final check. Her face was pale from worry, but her eyes burned with pride. She didn't want charity. She needed control. Damien met her at the front door. "You should have told me," he said. She stiffened. "So you could throw money at me?" "I didn't. I didn't want your pity." "It wasn't pity," he said, his voice lower now. "It was because I care." She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then her voice cracked. "I can't be your project, Damien. I have to stand on my own." She walked away, and with her went something he didn't know he needed until it was gone. The mansion grew quiet again, but this time the silence didn't comfort him. It echoed. The library felt hollow. The piano untouched. Even the flowers she once arranged seemed to droop a little more in her absence. Days passed, weeks, until one morning, Damien stood outside a modest apartment building in a part of town he had never been to before. He knocked. When the door opened, Lena looked surprised and tired, but not angry. "You were right," he said. "You don't need rescuing. But maybe I do." She stared at him. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes looked older. "You changed me, Lena. You reminded me what it means to feel alive." Her eyes filled with tears. "I missed you." He reached for her hand. "Come back." Not as staff. Just, come back. She didn't answer. She just stepped forward and hugged him. That night, in the quiet of his home, Damien played the piano again. The notes were raw, uncertain. Then came her voice, soft, uncertain at first, but then stronger. They finished the song together, like a whisper becoming a promise. It wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. It began with a door left open. Lena returned to the mansion quietly, not as a housekeeper, not with a broom or gloves or keys jangling from her hip, just herself. A soft cardigan clutched around her shoulders and hesitation in her every step. Damien hadn't given her a job back. He'd given her space and time, and silence. But not the cold kind. The kind that welcomes you to speak when you're ready. The first few days, she didn't know where to go. She lingered mostly in the library, pretending to read, though her fingers kept tracing spines of books she'd already opened 100 times. Damien didn't intrude. He would pass by the door, pause for a second, and then move on. Sometimes, she could hear him down the hall playing a single piano note over and over like he was trying to remember a song his heart forgot. One morning, she came in to find a book left open on the table. A sticky note inside. "I think you'd like this character. She's stubborn and brave." It was his handwriting, clean, slanted, unexpectedly personal. She smiled for the first time in days. The next day, she left a note in return. "I like her already, but she makes foolish choices." He replied in the margins of a later page. "Don't we all?" And just like that, the library became their language. They never planned to be there at the same time, but somehow they always were. Sometimes Damien would come in carrying 2 mugs, one plain black coffee for him, one creamy and sweet for her, no sugar because she liked it mild. She never told him that. Somehow, he just knew. She asked him once, as she ran her fingers across the polished table, "Do you always notice things about people you don't talk to?" He looked up from his notes, met her eyes, and said, "Only when I want to understand them." Their conversations stayed simple at first. They talked about literature characters who stayed too long in love, or not long enough, music, poetry. She told him she once sang in her high school choir and still remembered the words to songs she hadn't heard in a decade. He told her he learned piano from his mother, before things went quiet in their house. He didn't say why, but sometimes silence is more honest than words. Lena learned how much silence could say. He never asked her to do anything. He never told her where to be, or when. But one evening, she stayed late again, organizing the old sheet music in the piano room. He walked in, saw her bent over the floor, and asked gently, "What are you doing?" She looked up, embarrassed. "I couldn't find the second movement to this piece," she said, lifting a torn page. It felt incomplete. He crossed the room, knelt beside her, and held out a missing sheet from behind the stand. It was never lost, he said quietly, just buried. They stayed there on the floor longer than necessary, neither moving. The silence between them was thick, humming with something fragile and new. She wanted to ask about the she's who used to sing, about the grief that curled around the corners of his words, but she didn't. Instead, she said softly, "You should play again." And he said nothing. But his fingers grazed the keys the next morning. It was just a scale, nothing fancy, but it filled the hallway like sunlight in a closed room. Lena smiled. One afternoon, rain splashed against the windows. The storm was sudden, heavy. She was alone in the library, staring at a painting hung too high for her to reach. A faded landscape of a place she didn't recognize. Damien walked in without a word and stood beside her. "You don't like it," he said, after a beat. "It's lonely," she answered. He turned to her. "So are most of the things in this house." She looked at him then, truly looked. He wasn't polished today. No jacket, hair slightly damp from the rain, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. "Do you ever get tired of it?" she asked. "All this emptiness?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I stopped feeling it. Somewhere along the way, I stopped expecting warmth." She reached out without thinking, brushing a lock of damp hair from his forehead. Her fingers trembled the second they touched him, but he didn't pull away. He looked at her like she was the first person in years who hadn't been afraid of the cold. That evening, she didn't go home right away. They sat in the piano room, the fire crackling gently. He played a few chords. She hummed along, and when he paused, she began to sing, low, almost like a whisper. But it was enough to bring something back into the room, something lost. After the last note faded, he looked at her with something deeper than affection, something that felt like need. "Why did you stop?" he asked. She looked at the flame. "Because life doesn't give you time for songs when you're holding everything else together." His eyes didn't leave hers. "You're allowed to have music, Lena." She nodded, but her throat tightened. He understood without her saying it. The days that followed were soft, strange, like they were dancing around something neither of them dared to name. One morning, he left her a folder. Inside was a collection of vintage music sheets, handwritten by someone decades ago. She gasped when she saw them. "These are original," she said, stunned. He smiled. "They're yours." And that's when she knew. He was giving her back pieces of herself she hadn't even realized were missing. She sang again that night, alone in the library, thinking no one could hear. But from down the hallway, Damien stood by the doorway, eyes closed, just listening. And for the first time in years, he felt warm. It started with a storm. The sky darkened faster than usual that day, clouds spilling over the horizon like ink in water. Thunder rolled low, distant at first, then closer. The mansion windows caught the light, gray and heavy. And for the first time in weeks, Lena paused at the doorway, hesitant to step inside. Something in the air felt different, restless, almost like the house itself knew something was about to shift. Damien was already in the library. He stood near the tall windows, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where lightning split the sky. Lena stepped in quietly, carrying a tray with tea he hadn't asked for. But she brought it anyway, just like he left her music. Just like she sang when he wasn't looking. "You always know when to bring the right things," he said softly, without turning. She smiled. "I don't bring them for you. I bring them because I would want someone to bring them to me." He looked over his shoulder then, his expression unreadable, but his eyes spoke, and they said, "You've already brought me more than I ever asked for." The power flickered twice, then cut. A soft gasp escaped her lips. She hated the dark, ever since childhood. He noticed. "Wait here," he said. But she followed. They wandered the hallways together, guided only by the occasional flash of lightning through the glass panes. The silence was different now, thick not with grief, but with tension. The kind that comes when two hearts beat too close and try too hard to pretend they aren't. In the drawing room, they found a single candelabra with half-melted wax. Damien lit it with a match he kept in his coat pocket. She watched the flame catch, her face bathed in soft gold light, and he suddenly couldn't look away. "I used to love storms," she said, wrapping her arms around herself, "before everything started falling apart." He didn't ask what everything meant. He already knew. "I still do," he replied. She looked at him curiously. "Why?" "Because storms don't hide what they are. They stayed there for a while, sitting on the floor against the wall, like children caught in a world too big for them. And maybe that's what they were. Two souls just trying to breathe, to belong, to find color again in a world that turned gray too quickly. I had a sister, Damien said suddenly. You asked once who she was. Lena turned to him slowly. She used to sing, all the time, in the bath, in the car, while doing homework. My mother would yell, but she never stopped. That was the last thing I remember before the accident. Her voice, echoing down the hallway. Lena didn't speak. She placed her hand gently over his, just once, not to comfort, not to fix, just to say, I see you. And he let her. That night, they didn't touch again. But something between them had changed, like the air after thunder, still charged, still humming, but clearer. The next morning, the rain had stopped. The house felt washed, renewed. Sunlight streamed in through the tall windows. Damien found Lena in the kitchen, humming while rearranging jars on a shelf. She turned when she felt his presence. Everything okay? She asked. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he walked over to her, handed her a small envelope. Inside was an invitation, a gala, charity event for music education, his family foundation. I thought you might want to come, as a guest. Her eyes widened slightly. Why me? He shrugged. Because I'd rather have someone real there, someone who sees me. She hesitated. I don't have anything to wear. I already had that thought. Later that afternoon, a box arrived at her apartment. Inside, an elegant navy dress, simple but beautiful, with a soft satin ribbon at the waist, and a note tucked inside. Wear this if you want. If not, I'll understand. Lena stared at the dress for a long time. Then slowly, carefully, she tried it on. It fit as if it had been made for her. She turned in front of the mirror, and saw someone she hadn't seen in a long time. Someone alive. That night, she stood at the edge of the ballroom, the chandeliers glittering like constellations above her. Damien had arrived earlier. He hadn't expected her to come, but when she walked through the door, his gaze found her instantly. He stopped mid-conversation, mid-sentence. She was the only thing he saw. Their eyes met across the room. No smiles, just a quiet knowing. When he walked toward her, everything else faded. The music, the crowd, the sound of champagne glasses clinking. He offered his hand. Dance with me. She nodded. Barely. They moved slowly at first, careful, like learning to breathe again. He was a surprisingly graceful dancer. She followed easily. But it wasn't about rhythm. It was about gravity. The kind that pulls two people toward each other whether they want it or not. You look beautiful, he said against her ear. You look different, she replied softly. Maybe I am. The music slowed, their steps stilled, but they didn't let go. He looked down at her, his thumb brushing the back of her hand. Why does it feel like I've known you longer than I have? Because maybe you were waiting for me, she whispered. And I was waiting for you. That night, he didn't kiss her, not yet. But when he walked her to her car, he held her hand just a second too long, and she let him. They parted with silence. But it was no longer an emptiness. It was a promise. Something new had begun, and they both felt it, even if they didn't say it. Yet, somewhere between the warmth of his touch and the silence of her goodbyes, Lena had started to believe in things again. She started humming in the mornings, even when no one was around. Her apartment didn't feel quite so hollow anymore. And Sam, sweet, brave Sam, was getting stronger. There were good days now. Days when he could eat without nausea, laugh without pain, sleep through the night without trembling. His cheeks had color again. His sketches returned, little drawings of the world he dreamed of seeing someday. But healing wasn't linear, and neither was life. The call came on a Wednesday. A nurse. Urgent. Sam had collapsed, breathing erratic, heart rate unstable. The infection returned. They needed surgery, fast. Lena's mind blurred. She dropped everything. Her planner, her phone, her breath, and ran. The hospital walls swallowed her whole. White coats, monitors, clipboards with unreadable charts, 1,000 decisions and not enough time. How much? She asked the surgeon, her voice flat with terror. He hesitated. The number felt like a gunshot. Impossible. Cruel. She begged. Applied for emergency grants. Called relatives who stopped picking up years ago. Sold what little she had left. A friend of a friend promised to ask around. But she knew that kind of hope. It was hollow. Still, she tried. She didn't tell Damien. Not because she didn't trust him, but because she did. She couldn't bear to be that girl in his world again, the one with outstretched hands and nothing to offer back. He had given her so much more than he knew: music, kindness, belonging. She couldn't ruin it with desperation, so she disappeared. No message, no goodbye. At the mansion, her absence echoed like a broken chord. The library, her favorite corner, felt colder. Her coffee mug sat unwashed. A book she'd been halfway through remained open to page 194. Damien waited a day, then another. When a week passed, he couldn't stand the not knowing. He made calls, searched databases, traced an old contact sheet buried in the HR files, and finally he found it. Hospital, ICU. Immediate risk. Sam's name. The moment Damien read the file, he didn't hesitate. No calls, no questions. He got in his car, drove across the city, walked into the billing department, and signed the forms, quietly, anonymously. When asked how to list the donor, he wrote, "For the boy with brave eyes." That night he didn't sleep. He returned to the piano and played until the keys blurred. He thought of her hands, her laughter, the way she used to hum when she thought no one could hear. He missed her more than he wanted to admit. 2 days later, Lena showed up at the mansion, not as a guest, not as a returning heart, just someone coming to collect her final paycheck. She stood at the entrance like she didn't belong anymore, like the walls she once softened were now strangers to her. Damien opened the door himself. "You should have told me," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Her eyes were tired, swollen from days of crying, but her spine was steel. "So you could throw money at me?" she asked, crossing her arms. I didn't want your pity," she snapped. "I can't be one of your charity cases." His voice softened. "It wasn't pity." She shook her head. "I need to be able to do this myself, Damien. I've spent my whole life being saved, and it never ends well. I thought we were something else." "We are," he said. She looked at him for a long time, then her voice cracked. "I can't be your project." He reached out, but she stepped back. "I'm grateful, I am, for Sam, for everything. But this, us, it only works if we meet in the middle, not with you standing above and me reaching up." He opened his mouth to speak, but the words dissolved. She turned, walked away. He didn't stop her, and the door that had always remained slightly open between them finally closed. The mansion reverted, but this time it wasn't peaceful, it was hollow. The piano collected dust. The library lights stayed dim. The sheets of music they once arranged together scattered on the floor like abandoned letters. Damien became quieter than ever. He still went through the motions, attended meetings, signed checks, maintained the illusion of control, but something in him had gone still. He found himself standing outside her apartment once, just staring at the window, not knocking, just wondering. He missed the way she looked at him, not like a man with wealth, but like someone with warmth. And Lena, she missed him too. But she also needed to stand tall, for herself and for Sam. She launched her home organizing business like she said she would. Started small, just 2 clients, a borrowed vacuum, a second-hand van. But she showed up every morning with determination in her chest, and tired hope in her shoes. Sam was recovering now, slowly, sweetly. He asked about Damien once. Lena didn't know what to say. The truth lived in the silence between her sentences, and sometimes, in the middle of the night, she'd wake to the memory of him saying her name, like it meant something. But she stayed away, until the day came when she walked into her apartment, and found a book on her doorstep. No note, just the novel she once mentioned in passing, one she hadn't read in years. Inside, a sticky note. "You said you never finished it. I hope you still want to." Her hands trembled. She read it that night in one sitting. And when she closed the final page, she whispered aloud to the empty room, "I still want to." Winter came quietly, no sudden frost, no harsh wind, just a slow dimming of color from the world. Lena moved through her days, with a kind of quiet determination, like a woman walking through snow, carefully, steadily, even when the cold tried to bite through her skin. Her business grew, one appointment at a time. A retired teacher, a young mother with 2 toddlers, a grieving widower who couldn't throw away his late wife's scarves. Lena helped them sort their lives, while still trying to sort her own. She never said Damien's name aloud, But he lived in the songs she avoided, in the piano keys she no longer looked at, in the back of her mind when the wind got too soft to ignore. Sam, ever sensitive, never pushed, but he knew. One night, while Lena folded laundry, Sam asked quietly, "Do you think he misses you?" She hesitated. I think we both miss what we almost had." He didn't ask more, but she noticed the way he smiled gently, like he hoped she was wrong. Across the city, Damien filled his time with anything that made silence louder. Business trips, charity meetings, events full of people he didn't care for, conversations he couldn't remember, and yet, every quiet moment still led him back to her. He stopped playing music entirely, not because he didn't want to, but because it felt wrong, without her humming just a room away. The staff noticed his changes, the way he paused when someone mentioned her name, the way he lingered in the library, without picking up a book, the way he stopped correcting the piano tuner when they asked if the instrument would be used again. He barely spoke, but his loneliness thundered louder than words. Then came the moment he couldn't ignore anymore. A package arrived at the mansion, an old book he'd ordered months ago. Inside, pressed between two pages, was a photo, not from the seller, from her. A photo of her and Sam, laughing in front of a mural they'd painted together. On the back, a note. "He's okay now, thank you." He stared at the image for a long time, longer than he had stared at anything in months. Then quietly, Damien closed the book, picked up his coat, and walked out the door. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. The streets looked different now, quieter, more honest. He arrived outside her building just past sunset. The lights were on in her apartment, warm, lived in. There was a small plant on the windowsill, one he'd given her when she launched her business. She'd kept it alive. He smiled at that. He knocked once. Lena opened the door, wearing an old hoodie and socks with tiny moons on them. She looked surprised and tired, but not angry. He swallowed. "You were right," she blinked. "About what?" "You don't need rescuing." She said nothing. He took a breath. "But maybe I do." Her expression shifted, softened. That invisible armor she wore since childhood. It didn't disappear, but it cracked. "You changed me, Lena," he said, his voice trembling. "You reminded me what it means to feel alive, and I've never missed someone like this before. I didn't know missing could feel like forgetting how to breathe." She leaned against the doorframe, eyes shimmering. "I missed you too." There was silence, but this one was gentle. He reached for her hand. "Come back. Not as staff, not as anything you don't want to be. Just come back." She didn't answer. She just stepped forward and hugged him. Not a light embrace, but the kind that says, "I remember you. I forgive you. I'm still here." They stood like that for a long time. The snow began to fall outside, soft, silent, cleansing. She let him in, not into her apartment, into her life again, slowly, carefully, on her terms. In the days that followed, they began again. Not as strangers, not as saviors, but as something better, equals. She brought him tea. He helped her deliver boxes to a new client. She shared new songs she liked. He fixed the broken leg on her kitchen table. Sam laughed harder now. He called Damien Big Bro when he wasn't looking, and Damien never corrected him. Some things didn't need labels. One evening, she found a small piano in her entryway. It wasn't new, it wasn't flashy, it was hers. There was no note, but she knew. And that night, she played again. Some returns aren't loud. They don't come with fireworks, or declarations, or grand apologies. Some just begin on a quiet Tuesday, with shared coffee and a look that lingers too long to be casual. That's how Lena came back into Damien's world. Not with noise, but with presence. Not with promises, but with action. She didn't move back into the mansion. She didn't quit her business. She didn't stop fighting for her independence. But she made room for him in her mornings, in her stories, in her laughter, and he in return made space for her, not just in his home, but in his habits, his silences, his routines. They began to see each other for real, not the idea of who they wanted each other to be, but the truth, the messy, beautiful, broken, healing truth. Damien, the man who once lived behind polished walls and cold corridors, now found joy in grocery aisles. Lena taught him how to pick ripe avocados. He taught her how to navigate a wine list without panic. They argued over music, laughed over burnt toast, discovered that love was not built in candlelight. It was in mismatched mugs and shared playlists and long walks that ended with cold noses and warm hands. She asked him once, "Do you ever miss your old life?" He didn't even blink. "Not since you walked into this one." They were never perfect. Some days, he still flinched at touch. Some nights, she woke from dreams of hospital waiting rooms and empty bank accounts. But they learned each other's fears, held them gently and whispered, "You're safe now." Damien never brought up the payment again. And Lena never asked him how much. But one night, when she traced the back of his hand with her thumb, she whispered, "Thank you, that was enough." He surprised her often, not with gifts, but with understanding. When her client list grew, Damien quietly made calls, recommended her to friends, never took credit, never asked for recognition. Lena built her reputation from the ground up. The clients were hers, the vision, hers. But the doors he opened, he did so without needing her to notice. She noticed anyway. One afternoon, while organizing an old woman's attic, Lena found a broken music box. She fixed it, brought it home. Damien recognized the tune. It was a lullaby his sister used to hum. He didn't cry, but he sat quietly for a long time. That night, he held Lena closer in bed, said nothing. Just held her. She understood. It was always like that with them. No grand speeches, just moments. Gentle, unspoken, steady. One evening, Sam returned from a school art trip and walked into the kitchen to find Damien and Lena dancing in the living room. No music, just swaying, just quiet. Sam grinned and whispered, "You're such weird grown-ups." Damien grinned back. "We try." Time passed, not in leaps, but in soft chapters. The mansion changed too. Rooms once kept locked were opened again. Sunlight streamed into corners that hadn't felt warmth in years. A dog showed up one day. A stray with sad eyes and a stubborn bark. Lena gave him a name. Damien gave him a collar. Sam fed him under the table. He never left after that. They named him Rufus. Even the piano changed. Damien began composing again. Nothing flashy, just little pieces. A melody that sounded like spring after winter. A chord progression that reminded Lena of Sunday mornings with too much sugar in her tea. And one day, he invited her to sing with him again. She hesitated. "I don't sing like I used to," she warned. "I don't play like I used to either," he smiled. "That's the point." They sat beside each other on the bench, his fingers on keys, her voice in the air. The room didn't echo like before. It embraced the sound, wrapped it in memory and meaning and home. When the last note faded, she rested her head on his shoulder. "This feels like the beginning of something," she whispered. He kissed her hair. "That's because it is. There's a different kind of love that grows when no one is watching." Theirs wasn't loud. It didn't need the validation of strangers or the glare of spotlights. It lived in routine, in morning coffee, in shared notes stuck to the fridge, in the soft way Damien always waited for her car to pull in before turning off the porch light. And Lena, she bloomed. Not because of him, but beside him. Her business, Simplify and Soul, became more than a project. It became her voice. She didn't just organize homes. She helped people reclaim space in their lives. One woman wept when Lena found her late husband's journal under a stack of old sweaters. Another client, an overwhelmed father, called her an architect of calm. Word spread. Bookings doubled, then tripled. Still, she stayed grounded. Damien never interfered, never tried to manage her. But sometimes, he'd leave small things in her work bag. A stress balm for long days, a folded article about small business growth, a new pack of her favorite pens. Love, she realized, didn't always roar. Sometimes it simply showed up, and she showed up for him too. Damien had long given up on composing for others. But now he found himself returning to the piano with something more than memory. Lena asked once what he was working on. He just said, something unfinished. Weeks later, she found the sheet music on his desk. Title: Lena's Sky. He said it was how she made the world feel to him. Open, clear, quietly infinite. Sam continued to thrive. Stronger, brighter. He laughed more, played with Rufus every afternoon, and took up sketching again. He once surprised Damien with a pencil drawing of him and Lena dancing in the library. Damien framed it without a word, hung it right above the fireplace. Their home no longer felt like a museum of grief. It felt lived in, warm, with uneven rugs and half-finished puzzles and late-night kitchen crumbs. And yet they never rushed things. No proposals, no labels, just steady growth. But there were milestones. The first was the evening Damien invited Lena to an intimate charity concert. She assumed they'd watch from the audience. Instead, he led her backstage. "Wait," she said, heart racing. "I haven't performed in years." "I know," he whispered. "But you never stopped singing." She tried to protest. He placed a hand over hers. "You don't need to be perfect," he said gently. "You just need to be heard." And so she walked on stage, lights soft, piano waiting. Damien played. Lena sang. Not loud, not flawless, but real, vulnerable. By the final note, the room was silent. Then came the applause. Gentle, reverent. She looked over at Damien. He nodded once, with pride that didn't need words. Later that night, as they walked home under the stars, she said quietly, "That was the first time I didn't feel like I was pretending." He took her hand. "That's because you weren't." And in that silence between them, something beautiful settled. It wasn't infatuation. It wasn't rescue. It was love. Real. Tested. Steady. Spring came slow, like a secret whispered between branches. The frost melted. The mansion windows opened. Curtains fluttered with life again. There were tulips blooming outside the kitchen window, planted by Lena on a quiet Sunday morning, while humming to herself. Damien had watched her from the porch, coffee in hand, heart too full to speak. They didn't talk about moving in. It just happened, one box at a time, one night at a time. A drawer with her earrings, then a toothbrush beside his. A vase with her favorite lavender in the library.
Until there was no question anymore.
This was home, not because the house was grand, but because love had grown into its walls. They never rushed toward marriage. There was no ticking clock, no family pressure. They were already building something stronger than ceremony. And Lena had never wanted a love that was loud for the world, but quiet inside. She had that once, and it broke her. But with Damien, every look said, "I choose you again." Every day. Sam's recovery was complete now. His laughter returned like music in the hallway. He got into an art mentorship program, quietly funded by someone who never admitted it. But Sam knew. He always knew. "Big bro," he said one evening, throwing an arm around Damien. "You've got the emotional range of a potato, but you're my favorite." Damien chuckled. A very well-dressed potato. They all laughed. The house had changed. It had life now. Soft jazz from the kitchen. Rufus snoring on the couch. Paintings on the walls. Some Damien had inherited. Some Lena had found at local markets. Some drawn by Sam. The library had a worn couch now. A soft throw blanket. And a record player playing Billie Holiday late into the night. But the biggest change. The piano. Damien no longer played alone. Some nights he'd sit at the keys, and she'd join him, humming, then singing, then laughing when they missed a beat. They weren't professionals. They didn't need to be. Their music wasn't for audiences anymore. It was for them. For what they'd lost. For what they'd found. For what they'd built. One rainy afternoon, Lena walked into the library and found a new frame on the shelf. It was the photo she once found, of the young boy with Sam's eyes. Beside it, another Sam, now smiling, paint on his cheek, arms around both Damien and Lena. Beneath the photos, a small engraved plate. "Some things begin again." She stood there for a long time, tears gentle in her eyes. Damien didn't say anything, just came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "You okay?" he whispered. "I've never been more," she said softly. "Okay." He kissed her temple. "Good. Because I've been meaning to ask you something." She turned to face him, half laughing. "If this is about getting another dog." "No," he said, pulling a tiny velvet box from his pocket. Her breath caught. "But also maybe yes." She laughed through her tears as he opened the box. "Not on one knee, not with a crowd, just standing, steady, sure. Not because I need to fix you," he said. Not because you need saving, but because I've never loved anyone the way I love you. And I don't want another day without that. She blinked through the emotion, the overwhelming softness of it. Yes, she said, not waiting even a heartbeat longer. And as they hugged, Rufus barked in celebration. Sam whooped from the hallway. Rain tapped against the window like applause from the sky itself. That night, they returned to the piano. She hummed, he played. And together, they finished a song that had started the night. She cried in a library, holding a photo to her chest. It wasn't the end. It was only ever the beginning.